Welcome to this first NSCAD panel discussion. Our focus for tonight being anti-racist art education, conversations and actions. So before I share a little bit more about the aims of this conversation, I'd like to first just go through some of our webinar housekeeping. If you're not, if you haven't already done so, please could you say hello in the chat, add in your name and perhaps where you work and maybe where you are zooming from. That would be really helpful. The chat will close in a couple of minutes and will reopen later this evening. So if you don't have a chance now, you can please write your details in a bit later. That would be lovely. Thank you. So please feel free to ask questions for the panel please accept our apologies if we don't have time to answer everyone's questions. But I will begin with a few questions for Paul Dash, and then we'll move into our panel discussions chaired by Paul. This will be followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. Sophie Leach will be sharing your questions for the panelists. As they come in, she'll collate and share those with the panelists. And finally, this evening, we will conclude with Paul reading from the second edition of 4-Day Mourning. And this is a book that Paul will be republishing. And he'll explain a little bit more later in the evening. So we'll be now closing the chat and we'll be reopening after Paul's reading. So I think that have we closed the chat now?
Yes, that's closed now.
Yeah. Thank you. So why are we all here this evening? Why am I here? And why is this discussion of critical importance? So before we explore these questions, in my role as Vice President of NSCAD, I do welcome our esteemed colleague, friend, and chair for this evening discussion, Paul Dash. Paul is currently showing at Tate Britain's landmark exhibition, Life Between Islands. And to accompany this deeply engaging exhibition, he has updated and published the second edition of his remarkable autobiography, 4-Day Mourning, where he paints a detailed picture of his life as a child and that of a young adult and artist, drawing on the impact of two distinct but interrelated cultural experiences. We look forward to hearing more on this later. But for now, let's take a few steps back to gain an insight into the formation of our NSCAD Anti-Racist Art Education Action Group, some of whom are participating in this evening, and who will no doubt reference our anti-racist art education checklists. We are aware that many of you will have seen them, and we are delighted that they are already in use, serving to support the process of reflection, reviewing of current practice, for curriculum design, for resourcing, and for public publications. As was the case with many organisations, the Anti-Racist Art Education Group, many of whom are attending tonight, was formed in the shadow of the killing of George Floyd. Members of the group, aware of the implications of inaction at this time wanted to send a strong message that all art educators need to be responsible for reflecting on their practice, past, present, and future. And this very much in relation to the current educational landscape as we have it. And in their words, to not do so may mean that we are complicit in the continuance of racist messages by default. NSEAD is a learned society. We have a duty to educate ourselves, keep learning, and be part of real change. This requires us to share our stories, for deep listening, and honest dialogue. In response to events in 2020, NSEAD shared a collective call to action, setting out a 5-day, 5-week, 5-month, and 5-year plan. We must deliver on our priorities. We must deliver on our priorities to address inequality, diversity, and inclusion throughout our organisation and beyond. I speak this evening as an advisor to NSEAD Anti-Racist Art Education Group and their work on the checklists. I speak with lived voice and personal experience. I'm delighted to open this evening, the first of several ongoing conversations. So I'd like to begin now with a couple of questions that I prepared for Paul. Is that okay, Paul?
Oh, if I can answer the question.
So Paul, can you perhaps tell us how you're feeling about tonight's event, given its significance?
Given its significance, I think it's wonderful, and I've gone through the checklist, and I find it very complete, very well written, and thoughtfully developed piece of work. I think it's excellent, and being involved in this, bearing in mind that I haven't been in education since 2011. It's 10 years now. It's quite a momentous occasion for me, and I feel deeply honoured that you should actually ask me to be involved, because there's so many other people out there who have at least as much to offer as I do. So, you know, I say thank you all for that. And I've been in touch with some wonderful people here already. I shan't name names because I'll forget somebody, you know, but you know who I'm thinking of, the people I've been speaking to recently. And I know that people in the background whom I haven't been speaking to, who may have suggested my name. But I am thrilled and honoured, and I say thank you very much, and I'm looking forward very much to what people have to say this evening.
Oh, thank you very much, Paul. We're deeply honoured to have you here. It's hugely important that you are part of this conversation, Paul, and that you have agreed to chair it. You know, I'm aware that for many years you have researched and written about, and in particular, African Caribbean pupils in art education. What was your experience of conducting this research, Paul?
Well, I'll tell you about what led to the research in the first place, and that was my experience as a black kid at school. When I was at school in Oxford, I was the only black child of secondary school age in the whole city. If you go to Oxford now, it looks very different. But at that time, 1957, my brother and I, actually, my brother is 9 months older, sorry, he's 3 years older than me. He had 9 months to go at school to the age of 15, and then he had to leave, which he did with great pleasure, because it's a terrible school. But so he left after 9 months, and then I was on my own entirely, the only black child, not only in that school, but as far as we knew, in the whole of Oxford. And we would have known most of the black people in Oxford at that time, because we stuck out, you know, we were there, and most of them would have been, virtually all of them would have been Caribbean people. And most of them came to our home because, you know, my father bought a house. I think he's the first black person probably to buy a house in Oxford. And people came there and he cut hair. So the men came to our home to have their hair cut. So we would have heard about other children, and there weren't any. We never saw any. They just didn't exist. So I was a bit of a pioneer. I didn't intend to be, but that's the way it was. And at school, I had a terrible time of it because I had to survive a lot of racism, particularly on the part of a couple of teachers, including the head teacher. And I didn't see material by black artists. They weren't mentioned. Artists weren't mentioned anyway at my school, but certainly there weren't any references made to black artists or black people. And when I went on to art college, Oxford School of Art, now Brookes University, had a wonderful teacher, Leonard McComb, but there weren't black people involved. There weren't black students. We weren't introduced to African art or anything like that. Of course, when I went to Chelsea, and the same applied there, and then I went into teaching, and I was appalled by the lack of material, resources at school, in the schools where I taught, that focus on black cultural development or black practices. Not that people were against that sort of thing, but the resources simply weren't there. And in those days, of course, there was the ILEA, in the London Education Authority organization, and they set up various resource banks in the City of London where people could go and borrow stuff, including East London, where I operated. And I borrowed a lot of stuff, but there's nothing at all about the Caribbean. And it's almost as if we didn't exist. And so I thought, there must be stuff out there. Let's see what we could find. So I went about doing the research.
Yeah, and I think that research, Paul, not only served us very well 10, 12 years ago, but certainly does still, is still a very important piece of research that we can draw upon, even as we attempt to address those very same issues that you've described, you know, through the lack of representation of artists and the lack of resources that reflect the lived experience of a lot of our young people in our schools today.
I should say that being involved in a Tate exhibition is an extraordinary experience. I mean, obviously it's the Tate, but apart from that, I'm surrounded by these people: Keith Piper, Sonia Boyce, you know, Hugh Locke, Ronald Moody, these are Aubrey Williams, fantastic people from my early period when I first met, you know, began to meet black artists, black people, and you know, and I I thought these were like gods to me, and especially Sonia Boyce. And here I am showing alongside them. I just cannot believe it. And so that is an incredible honor. But they have turned things on their heads in a way, in that they're really talking about being black in Britain, or being of Caribbean backgrounds. For the first time, you've got that voice out there. Whereas before the 1980s and the emergence of the Black Art movement in Wolverhampton with Sonia and Keith and various others, you know, it wasn't really happening in the same way. I was a lone voice out there almost. I mean, there was Aubrey Williams, you know, one or two, Frank Bowling and so on, but Ronald Moody, Althea McNeish. But we were like, you know, Errol Lloyd, but we had like fingers on the hand. Whereas with the 1980s, so it went boom. And of course, we got this, you know, sudden emergence of very talented, brilliant artists, black artists, or artists from the Caribbean, with so much to say about being in this country and how they felt about being in this country at different levels. But anyway, I'm alongside them now. I'm very privileged to be.
And rightly so, Paul, and rightly so. you know, I think that I've certainly made my own visit to the show already. One of many visits, Paul, that I certainly personally need to make, being very much on my own personal journey with all of this, but also the journey that we're taking as an organisation and as a community in terms of NSCAD, and my involvement as Vice President in that too, just to fully process so much of what this exhibition means for us right now. So, you know, thank you, Paul, for maintaining your passion and need to make art, and we're grateful because it gives us hope. So thank you.
I think art is so important. It represents a part of being human that cannot be located anywhere else. And I think if people out there in government really understood what art is about and art making in schools, then they just make it even more abundant. I mean, I think it is such an important subject, and art teachers are doing such an incredible job.
Yes, no, certainly. Yeah. Paul, can I just, we're going to move into our panel questions now. I think that what we will do is just ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Thank you. So if we can perhaps, we perhaps start with Emily.
Thanks, Marlene. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
So I'm Emily Gopal. I'm a primary art specialist, but been teaching in secondary and primary sector for nearly 20 years now. And I don't know, Marlene, if you wanted us to say a little bit about why we.
Yes, please. Yes, yeah. That's important.
The ARIA group has been, it kind of spanned across a lot of the pandemic, you know, and it's been actually a really important resource for, I think, all of us as individuals, as well as the important work we've been doing in that group. But like Marlene said, after the killing of George Floyd in May, it felt that there was this huge rush to kind of fix racism. And what the group offered was a really important space for conversation, conversation that's still ongoing, that's really rich every time we meet, and a conversation that was in acknowledgement that this is not something that we can fix in 1 year, 1 month, one meeting. So these ongoing conversations have been really important to be part of, and you know, the amazing checklist has been a result of lots of really rich conversation, and conversation that we very often, you know, the meetings end in 10 times more questions, which is, I think, absolutely right, and as it should be. So I really, you know, I'm privileged to be a part of that group and part of the panel today.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you. Can we move now to Claire? Claire, if you could introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Claire.
How are you? Long time.
I know. Nice to
hi.
see you again.
Nice to see you too. Hi, I'm Claire Stanhope. I'm the head of art here at Harris Girls College, and I also lead the Centre for Creative Explorations. And my route here, I suppose, to this point, as with all things creative, it's through multiple encounters over like several years that has fortuitously evolved into this opportunity to collaborate with the wonderful people that are part of the ARIA group. And the common thread, I think, for me, that most of the experiences that led me here was that they required me to engage in a process of unlearning much of my personal and educational histories. So what started with questionings around like my own art education and where were the women artists and were there any women before Impressionism, led to various other questions. Who is valued in our curriculums, and as a teacher, who am I privileging within that, and can my students see themselves as integral to the curriculums that I've been developing over the years? So these like questions of who and what and why, a constant repeat over many years. And then obviously, like everybody's talked about, last year everything kind of exploded. The amount of groups that came to the forefront after the killing of George Floyd, the conversation just became really rich and fertile, and these questions, and for me, like as a white educator and educated through systems that I also started to want to trouble, that you realize that I'm implicit within those systems. So it's this really difficult process to try and disentangle yourself like from yourself. So that it's like that, the struggle within that. So being part of the RAIA group is like a way of trying to untangle this sort of very complicated and complex mess. And that's like everything. It starts with questioning everything and acknowledging that all the lots of stuff that was happening. It wasn't just about having a Black History Month here, or a diverse range of artists there. It's more complicated than that. And then for me, the RAIA group has and through the checklists and developing those and those conversations, it's sort of really helped develop this narrative around colonialism and racism that impacts and debilitates all of us. How to do that, and as for me, it's of course it's important that as a white educator we're an ally, but it's also more than that. It's about us stepping up and realizing we're all part of these histories, and therefore that we're impacted by them, and it can only be together that we can really actively change them. So being part of the RAIA group is part of that endeavour.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you. And Diane.
Hello, everyone. My name is Diane Minicucci. I teach art and photography at Thomas Tallis School. It's a very large, brilliant secondary school in South East London. I'm also the subject leader for photography. Hello, Paul. It's really nice to kind of virtually meet you. I think that I feel really fortunate to be part of a very progressive school where the arts are very enriching in our school. And, these are very important conversations that we have to have about decolonization and having an anti-racist art education. And for me, the ARIA group has been a kind of fantastic meeting place to kind of unravel and start to reconstruct the curriculum for the arts. And I think that the conversations have been very enriching, quite enlightening as well. And I think that it's been really great to have these conversations because we are unpicking everything. We're having these really honest, open discussions, and the checklists have been absolutely brilliant to kind of to start to deconstruct everything. And we are aware that we're only at the beginning now, so we've only just started, and it is a really long journey. These are very important conversations that we need to have. We are aware that the conversations can be quite difficult and they can be quite challenging, but it's a very important subject matter. And when I started to do the research within our department, along with, alongside lots of my colleagues, well, every colleague within our department, I felt immediately empowered. And, I want to pass that on to the students. I want the students to see themselves in every experience in different art lessons. And I want them to have that same feeling of empowerment. I think it's crucial. As Paul said, art makes people powerful. So all students should be, should have that feeling of being really powerful. So, it's, and as Marlene said, it's more than diversifying, just adding a few artists, but it's, as Claire said as well, it's about unpicking the history and reconstructing. So, you know, that's why I've been very, you know, I feel very fortunate to be part of the group. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. So I think, Paul, now you've got some questions for us, Paul, just so that we can begin this conversation.
Indeed. Shall I just go straight into it then?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Yeah. The first question for Emily. I hate being the first person to be asked the question, but yeah, Emily Gopal, what are the lived experiences of global majority educators and children within a racist educational system?
Nice small question to start with, Paul. Yeah, so I think actually, what are the lived experiences of our educators? I think even in the question, it kind of it raises some feelings for me that I've been having over the past few years of just a slight reticence to answer questions like that, almost on behalf of every global majority art educator, because really I can only ever speak to my own personal lived experience, and hopefully some of the time that will resonate with others. But I think one of the things that we have to be mindful of in these discussions, especially within education, within white spaces, is the conflation of global majority people into one group and one band. You know, for example, I am Indo-Guyanese, I'm London born, I'm a woman, and I can speak to my experiences as such. But in terms of my experience as an art educator, my personal lived experience, I've been reflecting on this and realised that in itself has changed. When I first started teaching, it was the early 2000s, and I grew up in North London in Haringey, but I actually went to school in Enfield, which is a suburb of London, and at the time was a very white suburb. So I had my own education in a very white school, you know, to echo what you were saying, Paul, not as extreme as your setting, but it was a very white school. And I went straight from there into my, you know, further education, to my teacher training degree. And I found myself teaching in a school in Hatfield, which again is just outside of London, and a very, very white school. And I was the only teacher of colour there. And in my honest kind of reflections about this, I realised that a lot of that time for me, and I think maybe a lot of people of colour will recognise this, a lot of that time was about assimilation, if I'm honest, because that's often what people of colour find themselves doing, is trying to assimilate the kind of the dominant culture in the spaces we find ourselves. And at the time I was in my early 20s, you know, so I was definitely not as you know, outspoken or confident as I am growing to be now. So that early lived experience was very much about assimilation. And, you know, we've spoken about, and we speak a lot about, decolonising curriculum. When I look back on my early lesson plans and my early curriculum design, I was very much leaning on that Western art history canon, because it's all I knew. It's all I'd been educated into, is that gang of white male artists. And I had myself, you know, and I've spoken before about the fact that I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I didn't question it. I didn't question where are the women when I was younger. I didn't question where are the brown people. And I think possibly I thought that there weren't any great artists of colour. But that changed, you know, I'm older now, the climate has changed. And so my lived experience has changed. And, you know, now I think it oscillates between an experience of, within these white spaces of schools that I still find myself in, wanting to be very outspoken, wanting to share different perspectives, feeling myself as an important voice in staff meetings, in curriculum design, in leading CPD events. But also, as we've spoken about in the ARIA group, sometimes not wanting to do that, sometimes the lived experience of being a brown female or a black female or a person of colour is not wanting to take on that responsibility. And certainly last year, when I was being asked to do a lot of speaking and thinking around issues of race and ethnicity, I got exhausted, and that was a really hard place to be, because as well as feeling exhausted, you feel a huge sense of responsibility to be the spokesperson for people of colour. So I think the lived experience, like everything, is ever changing, and we grow, we change. The climate definitely has changed, and hopefully is getting more, ripe and fertile for these conversations. But that's, and along that journey, we have sprinklings of kind of, microaggressions, from microaggressions up to kind of overt racism as a teacher, along the way. Things like we've spoken about being mistaken for the other brown teacher, or, all sorts of kind of experiences, which I'm sure you will all echo in your own way.
Very much indeed, Emily. Very interesting response to that question, I must say. And the second person now that we would like to respond to that question, which I'll repeat if necessary, is Diane Minicucci.
Hi, perfect pronunciation. Thank you, Paul. I had a very similar experience to you, Paul, because I grew up in the northeast of England. And in my school, I think there was, when I was in secondary school, there was only 3 black children, and that was myself and my brother and my sister. And, we, similar to what Emily said, we learn what we're taught, don't we? So, we don't know any different, really. And, as you said, the climate's changed. If it was now, having the benefit of hindsight, I would have said, where are the different artists? This doesn't reflect me, but we just accept what we were taught at that time. And I suffered lots and lots of racism from teachers, obviously from other students. And I'm just thinking now, if I'd had kind of, a different experience in having, being shown different artists, it would have been a different experience, because I would have felt, confident and knowing that there were other people like me. But, we didn't have any of that. We weren't taught any of that. It was just, I felt very kind of left out, and I felt, this is what I had. And, it wasn't really exciting or engaging. And I didn't really, even though I loved art as a student, as a secondary school student, I don't think I did as well as I could have done, because I wasn't excited by what I was being shown. And I specifically remember there was, we had an older family friend that was at St. Martin's, and he was studying fashion. So I got my excitement from him. He was, his family was obviously Jamaican, West Indian, and he had all of this color and he had this design. And he was saying to me, as my family was saying to me on the other side, this is what you can achieve, And I remember going back to into the class and saying, yeah, I want to go to St. Martin's, and I want to study fine art there, and I want to study fashion. The teacher said, don't be silly. None of you, speaking to the whole class, the class as a whole, none of you should apply to any of the colleges in London, because you won't get in. And I just thought, oh, she's so silly, because I had my parents at home and the family friends saying, you can achieve anything as long as you kind of put your mind to it. So that was my personal education. But I that was my experience. But I'm aware that not everybody has, people to kind of push them. And I think that's another reason why I want to be that kind of teacher, to say to students, not only, because of their color, but I also want to, as I said, in our school, we're quite, we have a really rich, exciting curriculum, and it's full of contemporary artists. And I know that, my colleagues and I are engaged in, researching. We share our experiences of seeing exhibitions, and, I've shared with everybody the current exhibition at the Tate that's coming up. So, lots of us have booked into that. And it's that kind of sharing which I didn't have when I was younger. And I think because I missed out, I just want to make sure that our students have that rich, varied curriculum, and they have that, very enriching and empowering experience as well. So, I think it's crucial, it's crucial to their experience, not only in art education, but in education of life being included and having, you know, feeling valued and having that, you know, having a right to be there. So I think it's crucial, it's vital.
Thanks very much indeed, Diane.
Thank you.
It's stimulating hearing people speak with such, you know, knowledge of the difficulties, and yet, you know, offering hope for improvement for everyone. It's wonderful. The second question, this time it's for the person that will be answering this time will be Claire, and the question is, how can I approach the difficult conversations needed to challenge racism in our subject?
Okay, thank you. First thing I think to acknowledge is that what the conversation is, what it looks like, how it is started will be different for all of us, dependent on our context, backgrounds, experiences, and there's no one way to do this. It might be using the RAIA checklist, it might be through sharing experiences, resources, films, books, that are things that are already in your context. But what it will hopefully do, it's to begin an adventure that's really going to enrich whatever place it is that you're situated within. For me, that meant various conversations happened simultaneously, but probably the most important conversation, and in some ways the most difficult conversation, was the one that I had with myself. And it's a conversation that I haven't yet finished and suspect that I never will. And engaging truthfully with like aspects of my education and things I've spoken about before, and my unconscious bias, like literally taking a test, was really fascinating, as I could viscerally feel how taught race, gendered, religious, ableist stereotypes really play into our split-second decision-making, and realizing that our unconscious biases are they are taught and sedimented in history and society through hundreds of years of colonial narratives, then you can take ownership of them, because anything that is learned can then be unlearned. Although this isn't always easy, and it's a continuous process, and it's a struggle, it's also really empowering. So this process like helped me then discussing with others, and those conversations are often quite uncomfortable and difficult, but to be able to move those difficult conversations from the personal into a space between, a socially constructed space that really needs to be unpicked, can help to sort of find a route through. It can be a starting point, and a simple way is just to look at what's already there, like what you've already got. So for example, we started with an audit on our schemes of learning, so in an educational context, and just looking at the percentages of who's in it, how many men, how many women, which global communities are included or not. And at the time when I had started teaching and writing all my schemes of learning, I could have happily given a talk about how amazing they all were. But it's only really when you start to unpick it and actually boil it down to those like hardcore percentages that you can see the gaps and actually realize what you do miss and how your unconscious biases play throughout that, but also how our education plays throughout that. You know, what we've already spoken about, that what you're taught, when you're taught through an education system that does leave a lot of people out of it, then you end up repeating those narratives. So, you know, once you start questioning, you just get more questions. So it triggers a process, you know, but LGBTQ plus, you know, disabled artists, who else is missing within the context? Like, so it evolves, it's ever evolving, and importantly, I think it's, you know, our identities are emergent. You know, things are very different now than they were when I was growing up, and especially when you look at different communities. So it is a conversation that can't ever end, because it is always renewing itself. It's always becoming something different. And yes, checklists are really helpful, but having any conversation in whatever format is only ever empowering if they then draw all communities together. And curriculum and art education is such a brilliant way to do that, because it does do that. That's integral to it. So, you know, once we have that way in to actively change something, other conversations then may not be as hard to instigate if the process is already started.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. You know, obviously we are restricted on time, so we have to move on to Emily again. But thank you very much indeed for that. Very enlightening. Emily, same question. Emily Gopal, would you like me to repeat it?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Paul.
Would you like
Yeah.
me to repeat it?
No, that's fine. I got it. Yeah, so just to, I guess, to echo a lot of what Claire said around curriculum being a good lens through which we can instigate these conversations within educational settings. I know from my own experience working with schools that just a quick glance across a primary school art curriculum will very quickly show you, you know, like we touched on before, that's very well trodden gang of male white artists. So that's a really good starting place for looking for conversations around decolonizing curriculum and anti-racist conversations. I think also, you know, again, like Claire touched on, this thing of uncomfortable conversation. And I know pre-killing of George Floyd, we were much less good at it, and we're still not great at it as human beings, at feeling uncomfortable. You know, there's a real icky, horrible quality to a lot of the conversations and a lot of the self-reflections that have to go on. And as human beings, we are not very good at that, but it's something that we have to kind of we have to go through in order to progress through and unpack and unpick what the current state of affairs is. But importantly, I will just say on this, I know we need to speed through this question, but really importantly, which links to the previous question around lived experiences, I think it's really important to say that as a person of colour, that you must never feel that the weight is on you to instigate these conversations. You know, we've touched on being a person of colour in white spaces, and I think there's often that tendency to feel like you hold that baton, and if you're not seizing every opportunity to challenge and share perspectives, then you're failing. And I think it's really important that we don't bear that weight as individuals, and that you have networks. You know, I know within the ARIA group, we are developing a safe spaces network for sharing these kind of lived experiences. And yeah, you know, sharing the exhaustion, the fatigue that can come with being looked to be a kind of black explainer or brown explainer. And I think it's really important that you have resources, that you have family members or friends or networks that you can go to for support in having or not having those conversations in your place of work. Because you will miss opportunities. You know, there will be those microaggressions that happen, and you'll go home at night and think, oh gosh, I didn't challenge that, or I didn't respond to that in the right way. And it's really important that you have people you can go to lean on and talk about that.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Very good indeed. Thank you very much. Right, the third question now, and this one is, how can I start the process of decolonizing the art curriculum? And what might an anti-racist curriculum look like? And the first person I would like to respond to that is Marlene.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, I think this is, you know, the question of how do I start is really, you know, where we're at really in terms of, you know, what do I use, what do I do to begin this process? Well, I would say that we need to think and reflect and review what is it that we currently have in terms of our curriculum. You know, who is it that has written the curriculum? You know, who do we have represented within our curriculum? Using the ARIA checklists as a means by which we can, and it doesn't have to be a linear process of working through the checklists. It's very much a case of deciding where it is that you feel you do need to start, and probing and investigating and building your knowledge. I think there is, I know certainly for me, I've got a ferocious appetite at the moment for wanting to learn about the things that I didn't learn, that wasn't presented to me through my educational experience. And so looking at where there are gaps in what it is that we're presenting to the students. Certainly, I think, Paul, we're talking about 10 years ago that I was first introduced to the Autograph APB resource, a really rich resource full of photographic images, black and brown people that I'd never seen in quite that way before, presented in a way that a high quality, well-produced resource, and using that as a way of thinking about, okay, so what is it that I need to do with this resource to ensure that my curriculum is diverse, does represent the students that I have in front of me? Do they see themselves reflected in what it is that I'm presenting to them? There are many more resources now that are being developed, certainly as a result of the awakening that we currently have. I know that Diane Minicucci, for instance, is the person behind the Amazing Black Artists resource that is online through Instagram, that we can now access. So it's really taking time to build our knowledge, look at where we've got gaps in our own knowledge, asking questions of ourselves, but also of those people that hold that knowledge. And then once we've asked those questions, really to enter into some deep listening, to again really learn and understand who has written, you know, where are we, where are we at in terms of our current educational landscape? Who's put that landscape together, and what is it that we need to do in order to ensure that everybody that we have in front of us in terms of our classroom and that we're interacting with are represented.
Thanks very much, Marlene. That's very good, as always. Can we move on again to Diane, please? Same question.
Again, thank you. I think it's, you know, it starts with having those deep conversations. It starts by, you know, as Marlene said, reviewing and reflecting on what you already have. But, you know, it's research. There's a variety of different ways to research. And I think it is, you know, when we, you know, one of the things that we came up with, it's a quite, you know, it's already been touched upon when we talk about, you know, what is in our, you know, what is included in our schemes of work, what are we teaching? What have we been teaching for many years? What has worked? What has worked? What has not worked? How does this reflect the students? And, you know, we've had this conversation about teachers using other cultures and maybe not really understanding what is going on. So, you know, the typical, sorry to say, if you have this, but, you know, the African masks. What are we learning from African masks? And, you know, when we say Africa, Africa is kind of this, it's such a huge continent. So, you know, if you can't kind of generalize, so it's kind of generalizing. And again, you know, there's so many different resources because, you know, we've used Autograph when I was a student. you know, I was studying, and you know, I went to St. Martin's, and they were, you know, they first introduced me to Autograph, and they also introduced me to Steve McQueen, that is a brilliant filmmaker. So, you know, we were able to go there to do research. So that's when you know, the research really opened up for me. And I think now I've started to dip into that research again. You know, I've started the resource Marlene mentioned, the Amazing Black Artists on Instagram, and I'm constantly, you know, engaging. And I think that is, you know, we have to do the research, but we have to invest as well. And our school was able to invest in terms of having the anti-racist art teachers come in, and well, they didn't come in. We had like an online session with them. And before, after, and during that period, I was able to, I feel like in our school, I'm kind of given space to have those discussions, to have those difficult conversations, to have those difficult, you know, meetings where we just have to open up and we have to review and we have to say, this is not working and this is not working because. And I think it's just being honest and doing the research. I think, you know, I would say it again, research is so important. And there's, you know, 1,000 ways to do it. Looking at my page is a good thing, but also Innova, people like Autograph, and there's so many different organizations as well that can help. You know, they've got fabulous, absolutely brilliant resources, Autograph and Innova, places like that. Yeah.
Thanks very much indeed, Diane.
Thank you.
Excellent. You know, I'm learning so much this evening. Autograph is a fantastic organization, isn't it? And, of course, David A. Bailey, who's curated the exhibition at the Tate, was very, very involved with that. And Emily, if you can make a statement on this, please.
Yeah, just very quickly to add, because I know I kind of speak on behalf of the primary sector, and I guess, yeah, just to highlight that in the primary sector, you know, often what you have is non-art specialists leading and designing art curricula. And they're, in a way, more, perhaps more than in the secondary sector, what you have is a class teacher who's given the additional responsibility of designing a whole art curriculum. And so what they'll often do, understandably, because teachers are very, very busy, is look to places like galleries or pre-designed resources. And you know, what I try and encourage people to do is not necessarily rely on those for the exact same reasons, that those pre-designed resources very often lean back on that same canon. But even looking to places like, you know, Tate, National Gallery, we know now that they don't necessarily hold all the answers to what is art and what is culture. So I think a lot of what the primary sector can do is encourage students, rather than looking outwards for this thing of cultural enrichment or cultural capital, is encouraging students to engage with schemes of work and lessons that that encourage them to bring in their own cultural identity, celebrate their own identities, their own cultural heritage, so that they know that their cultural heritage is very valid and valued, and that they can be really strong in that before engaging with the status quo of what is culture and what is art. Because it's fine to engage with these things, but we can do so with a critical eye, and we can do so from a place that is one that is very grounded in our own pride, in our own cultural heritage. So I think, yeah, as well as curriculum reform, designing opportunities for students to celebrate their own nuanced cultural heritage is really important.
I think that's critical. I totally agree with you. And that means, of course, that in this period of intersectionalism, where we have people who are not necessarily black or brown, but who are also in the margins, they too can have a voice, if you allow them to have a voice, to speak. They have these conversations, what we were talking about earlier, between yourself and the children in the classroom. Then they begin to tell you about who they are. You're not imposing on them your will, but they're telling you, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I want to talk about. And I think that's where art education really has so much to offer, not just the children themselves, but the world. Well, I think we should go on to the final question. And what aspirations exist for anti-racist art education? An interesting question. Claire Stanhope.
Okay, that's a massive question. So to aspire to an anti-racist art education system, I think first it needs the acknowledgement that colonial and patriarchal racist agendas dehumanizes all of us. So we need to be able to activate in multiple ways from various experiences, perspectives, backgrounds, and how this is it's a joint endeavor, that it's not a tick box linear exercise from A to B, but one that's emergent and ever evolving. And it's integral to see that as part of the future of our subject. Art was used to perpetuate colonial narratives, but it's also the subject that can help to challenge and reimagine them. And therein, I think, lies the hope. So whatever perspective, history, experience we come with, we already have the tools with which to do something, or to undo it or redo it. And then when we think about hope within like a neoliberal education setting, which is reliant on grades and certificates, there's like a real fragility to that. And it's very individualistic. But hope in terms of this question, or if you know the work of Bell Hooks, for her, you know, in her context, the way she writes about it, then it's all about possibility. And it's that which I find inspiring, as it's an orientation towards the future, and a future that we all have an active part in shaping. And of course, Paulo Freire, he talks about this idea of hope not being alone, like the thing that's going to change anything. But it, you know, and he sort of said in his book, it's like hope is not enough, but it's necessary. And you can't win just with it, but without it, then the struggle towards something is weak and unsubstantiated. And we need critical hope. And I think he said something like the way fish need water, or unpolluted water, I think he said. And it's, you know, that's inspiring. That's what art is. That's our, you know, hopefully where we find our, you know, our breath and our inspiration. And it's that hope that through these discussions, that we've been having with the Aurea group, and, you know, that everybody has in their own settings and curriculums, you know, that's where the critical work is done. That's where we start to inspire and motivate and unlearn stuff that's come before, by orientating ourselves towards a different kind of future. And our education is so integral to that. You know, as Paul said, it's this, you know, you said it's our humanity, and so we have to use this as a tool to activate something better than where we have been. And it's got to be at the forefront of those conversations. And unfortunately, the government never seems to realise it. It's years and years in, we're still fighting that particular case, but it is, you know, and with, you know, that's where this subject's so powerful, because it's embedded in collaboration. You know, we do these things together, and it's a collaboration that we hopefully are all engaged in.
Excellent. And thank you very much indeed for that, Claire. And Marlene, to wind up.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. And I wholeheartedly agree with so much of what Claire has already shared. And I mean, I would keep it really very, very, very simple in that, you know, certainly my personal aspiration, and I'm sure the aspiration of NSEAD, is that every child, regardless of their race, has access to high quality art education that reflects them and their lived experience, that they will see themselves reflected in the resources and the processes and the artists that are presented to them. So that you know, that we work very hard to remove the barriers that prevent that from happening. So certainly that's my own sort of personal aspiration and my hope. I think that we've come already. We have achieved so much in just this last you know, few months and year over this last year, in realizing some of those aspirations. And it is just a start, and there is so much more to do. But I think that we have intent, we have a will. I think that we are very much together on this. I think that we are supporting one another in this process, recognizing that there is such a richness that can come from being actively anti-racist in terms of what we do and what we present in terms of our education.
Thank you very much indeed, Mario. I think we can only be full and complete people when we have anti-racist art education, certainly in our subject area, because racism rots the individual racist. And not only does it affect the object of that racism, but it rots the inside of the individual racist. That's my view. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I think, Sophie, you're going to now share with us some questions that perhaps our audience, our participants might have for us.
Yes, we are going to just ask a couple of questions and then we'll move to Paul's reading from his book. But thank you ever so much for putting your questions into the panel. And I hope that those of you that I've answered just by typing, bear with us, please. And we will, I hope in the next 2 questions that we're going to merge a couple of that come in. So one for Di, please. Could you just go over again what the AREA checklists are, and does it have a progression map with diverse artists included? And it's a question to you in part because of the work you've been doing on your website.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I'm so sorry, Sophie.
That's okay. So what are the AREA checklists? I think not everybody who's attended, and that's lovely, knows what they are. And do the checklists have a list of diverse artists in order to make a progression map?
No, the checklists don't have, so the checklists are a kind of, how can I say, a kind of series of kind of pointers that you can include when you are either designing schemes of work, or, you know, there's one that leads to kind of what kind of language do we use, for example, you know, when we're talking about a diverse group of artists. You know, I gave an example earlier about, you know, we don't say African artists. Africa is a, you know, it's a large continent, so we have to make sure that we're doing research to pinpoint exactly what we, you know, what we want to teach, what we want to show, what is it about that particular culture that we're talking about. So, you know, one of them is talking about language. So it's just kind of unpicking things that we might have used or that we might have said before, and just kind of, in, you know, kind of very gently directing people to the you know, to the correct language to use. That's just kind of one of them. The when we're talking about a diverse range of artists, you know, decolonizing is kind of like a lot more than that. It's about being able to you know, move away from the traditional canon of white European male artists, and it's offering a very rich curriculum. Now, you know, this is about each teacher or each faculty doing their own research, even, you know, the getting together and finding out what, you know, which artists that they want to use. You know, there's so much information out there. And it's not about providing a resource for people, you know, it's about providing kind of pointers, kind of like the backbone, but every one of us has to do our own research. And believe me, when, you know, everyone in our faculty is, you know, visiting exhibitions, reading books, reading articles, passing them on to each other. You know, we've got 3 different Instagram, Talis Arts, Talis Photography, and then, you know, the amazing Black artist, and we're sharing everything there. But each of us is engaging and investing in research. And I think that is the most important thing. No one has given us the information. We've had to do that research. But the research is brilliant, and the research is really important. It's vital. And, you know, it's there. There's so many different places where you can, you know, where you can research the work of different artists. And I think, you know, we all have to invest in a little bit of time to do that research. You know, it's just crucial. We have to do it. You know, I listened to a talk. There's a brilliant book called Decolonizing Photography by Mark Seeley, who's the founder of, not the founder, the director of Autograph. And I was listening to a talk with him and two American artists and Vanley Burke, a British photographer. And he was saying, you know, I asked a question, you know, what do we as educators do? I already knew the answer, but he just said research. That's what you've got to do. It's research. And, you know, the checklists are an important resource to help you as you do the research, just to make sure that you are saying the right thing, using the right language. And yeah, it will just, yeah, it's a very vital resource, useful resource for, you know, to work with alongside the research. But that's what I would say. Yeah.
Thank you, Diane. That was a question from Ishara Pereira. So thank you very much for that question. I'm going to merge 3 questions that have come in and ask the panel, and that's from Liz and Graham, and Graham's also written a few more. So I'm sorry that we can't get through all of them, but if I merge these together and ask the panel to say one action that they would do in order to diversify the curriculum. And if I could ask Marlene to begin.
I think that certainly I would talk to the students. So I think that we are, you know, it's a two-way process, isn't it? Really, to start with. Well, you know, what are the students interested in? You know, often it is a case that students, you know, we don't know what we don't know, but there's also something around students sometimes hold information and knowledge that we don't have, and certainly that I would say that's one way.
Thank you, Marlene. And Emily?
Yeah, I guess to sort of build on what Marlene said and something that I mentioned earlier, which is around building in lessons which are, you know, rather than using artists in the way that they sometimes are used in the classroom, which is that you look at an artist and you kind of emulate their work. Perhaps using, and a lot of contemporary artists are really good for this, looking at the themes and the way that they work with their own cultural identity. And I know, Paul, you do similar. But artists like Njideka Akinwumi Crosby, Chila Kamari Berman, these artists who use their own mixed cultural heritage in their work. So we are then modelling how real life artists draw on their own personal experience as a really valued and valid way to produce artwork. But also, just to add to that quickly, there are some really practical tips, and one of the things I often get teachers to do is to start including in their planning documents, including thumbnails of the artists, because that's a really instant visual way of just kind of start seeing, you know, and it just holds us all accountable.
Thank you, Emily. And Claire?
I was thinking about what I think's been the most interesting one that I've done, and I think again it's going to go back to the students and this question of who are our artists. And I think the best way that, or the most inspiring way that I've come across is recognizing that actually we don't have to look outside of the school context for our artists. They're sitting right in front of us, and having some of the incredible work that they have done, and then using that back into our schemes of learning and our curriculum, so that they, you know, that's cultural capital and all of that, that they can see that they are feeding into this rich resource themselves. So the other students that then come up after them, they know that that's an artist that was sitting in their seat, and it's come from our context within our school in this particular area. So that's I love that one, seeing them in the curriculum, seeing students.
Thank you, Claire. And we've been asked, could you say the book again that you mentioned for one of the people that have asked the question? It's a photography book. We can't hear you. We just couldn't hear you then, Diane. That's
Sorry,
it.
I've done that old lady thing of not unmuting. Decolonizing the Camera by Mark Seeley.
Thank you. And if you can very quickly sum up, what one action would you take to decolonize the curriculum?
One action, first of all, collaborate. You know, it can't be just one or two teachers changing the curriculum. So collaborating, so I will say it's very difficult to sum it up in one word, but collaborate with the team and all of us kind of discussing, reflecting, and doing the research together, and yeah, working collaboratively. And I think, you know, it is, you know, somebody said having those conversations and listening as well. So it's being able to, you know, I feel very fortunate at our school that I can talk and people would listen. And I think it's, yeah, just having that conversation with each other and just making sure that it is a kind of two-way conversation, and then kind of planning together collaboratively, listening and talking to each other and doing the research together. It's very important. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for chairing. I think that's a wonderful way to stop the Q&A, to end on Diane's point that this is truly about starting conversations. And it's what you've done tonight. And you've shared a lot of ideas, a lot of experience, and essentially, I can see from the questions that we haven't asked how much everyone's really valued your insights and ideas to develop this. So we are going to move now to Paul, who is going to read from the second edition of his book. And we're hugely grateful that you've done this. It's only just published. I know that we've run over, but I know that many people have joined us in order to hear this book. So thank you very much, Paul. And we will, at the end, return to Michelle, who will close the session. But thank you, Paul. We're looking forward to your reading. Thank you.
Yeah, Sophie, I should say actually that it's not quite published yet.
Oh,
It could be, but there have been disasters in the background, nothing to do with me, I assure you, but the people who were copy editing and printing and so on, I mean, right, a mess of it. And these copies were sent to me, and I refused to put them into the shops. They were meant to go to the Tate and elsewhere, but I thought I couldn't do that until the awful mess they'd done on the bit of the layout and so on, which was disastrous, was sorted out. So today I've got the final, hopefully the final manuscript back as a PDF, and I'm going to start reading that tomorrow, and hopefully next week they'll get on with printing it. Anyway, the book is called 4-Day Morning. This is a Caribbean term. It doesn't make sense like this, is it? Yeah, sorry. 4 days, spelled F-O-R-E-D-A-Y. It means before day, there is morning, dawn, really. So it's about, initially the idea was to write about my years in Barbados. I came to this country in 1957. So in the middle of Windrush, bang in the middle of it, really. And so I spent my dawn, my early years in Barbados, and then my remaining school years in Oxford. And so I wanted, so it's a nice sort of position to be in, straddling cultures. And I wanted to write about that because I felt that a lot of people didn't know us really as Caribbean people. Some people thought we were savages that swung from trees, quite literally. And that we were illiterate and that we were coming here and taking things from the British. It worked the other way, actually, but never mind. So I wanted to show the human side of being from the Caribbean, and then the downside and the upside from being in Oxford. What else? The section I'm going to read today, I'm sorry about this, but mask wearing has affected me in this way. It's affected my throat. And, you know, I've had x-rays and I've got this amoxicillin or something, this medication, but it's not really doing a hell of a lot of good. So I'm sorry if I sound a bit hoarse or not very clear. I'll read from this section, which is called A Momentous Year, 1955. And it's a momentous year for the reasons that become apparent as I start reading. 1955 was a year of big occurrences in our lives. It started with an experience that required us as individuals, members of a family, and subjects of British imperialism, to question issues of belonging and ethnic valuation. Princess Margaret visited the island in February. I was in Barbados then, of course. I was 9 years old. So she visited the island in 1957. I was greeted with all the pomp and ceremony attendant on the presence of a very special guest. Nervous excitement rippled through the island, and there was a sense of national pride caught up in the event. Inevitably, a grand public welcome come spectacle of celebration was planned for her welcome at Garrison Savannah Racecourse. Children from schools across the island, including mine, were bussed in for the occasion. Weeks before the arrival of the princess, my primary school prepared for participation in the event. We were coached to sing a song of welcome. That sound, the first line of which went, "Oh, hail, Royal Princess Margaret." I won't try to sing it, but I could do. Was practiced till we could memorize it by heart. There were school rehearsals also for the national anthem, God Save the Queen. On the day of the visit, there's a huge crowd, people of all ages and types, including children in school uniform. There are also dignitaries, what we call great or big people in our Barbadian dialect. The Governor General, the Prime Minister, other politicians and especially invited guests were in attendance. But supreme amongst them all was the princess. She stood out by her dress and style, spoke from the specially raised platform, then took a circular route of the garrison in a Rolls Royce to greet the people. There was, of course, the regal wave, so practiced by many royals before and since. I was awed at seeing a person of her high standing, a woman almost deified by distinction of being white and royal, whatever that meant. It begged the question, could a Black woman be a princess? I didn't think so. You would have to be white and British for that. No one really explained what it all meant, except that Princess Margaret was treated as a higher class of human from others, a saint on earth. Sadly, these questions were never raised or broached anywhere, not even at home. We simply accepted the status quo, the inevitability of it all. Instead, there was a profound silence over issues of power and those who ruled over us, which of course problematized distinction of class and race. Questions which I took with me into adulthood and study in higher education. Now I go on to talk about something quite different, Hurricane Jeanette. I said 1957, it's 55 actually just happened. Hurricane Jeanette struck on September the 22nd. We were warned beforehand, and locals showed locals showed unusual urgency in securing their homes. Windows were boarded up, men climbed ladders to batten down shingles on the rooftops or corrugated sheeting. Fencing was strengthened, and outhouses, you know, we had toilets at the back of the garden, held firm with stout timbers. I could see fear in people's eyes. One was left in no doubt as to the seriousness of the challenge ahead. Strong winds and rain swept through the island. We stayed indoors and peered at the world through the windows and gaps between the timber planks. Outside, the violence of the event was unmistakable, as trees' boughs were broken or uprooted, and loose timbers and corrugated iron sheets blown about. During the evening, it got worse. My father brought up limbs of wood from the cellar and started pinning the house together. The place looked strangely fragile and vulnerable, with the timbers zigzagging through the center of it. Moving from one room to another necessitated stepping over or stooping beneath chunky wooden beams. The full force of the hurricane struck in the early hours of the morning. I was awakened by the roar of the wind, which whistled as it penetrated every crevice and questioned every gap in the house. My father frantically adjusted the reinforcements, adding the odd nail here and an extra piece of timber there. He checked the roof from inside for signs of weakness in the carpentry, indications of a leak developing or a gap appearing, but everything held firm. Daddy kept wandering around the house, concerned that something might give away at any moment and could lead to a catastrophe. I later appreciated that my father was doing more than protecting his property. He was ensuring the survival of his family. At daylight, the storm was still raging, but we had got through the worst. As the wind abated, it was possible to survey the damage. There was some flooding, and almost every fence in our district had been flattened. Coconut, mahogany, and other trees had been blown over or badly damaged, and power lines brought down. Many old wooden homes were simply destroyed, with furniture, clothing, and other belongings smashed or strewn about. Later that day, gruesome stories about the hurricane circulated. We heard the distressing news that 25 people who'd sought shelter in a country church had died when the roof fell in on them. There's also the grisly story of a corrugated sheet decapitating a donkey in someone's garden. We were relieved to be alive and in good shape. I'll move on to a different section. I should say that when my parents came to this country in 1955, myself and two of my siblings, one older and one younger, were left with an aunt and uncle. And that relationship didn't work out very well. They treated us well, but they obviously didn't want my older brother, Gerald, or myself staying in their home. They were childless. They were interested in our younger brother, Levi. And you know, he developed a very close relationship with them. They absolutely adored him. But Gerald and I, we moved to a different family, a different aunt and uncle, my mum's sister, who had married my father's brother. I mean, they were very close. We got on there extremely well. Our uncle, and this is what I'm writing about, that particular family, the second family. Our uncle and aunt's property was effectively a small farm where not only chicken were kept, but a couple of cows pigs, sheep, and rabbits. There was also a donkey and cart. I loved the early morning call of the cockerel, the bleating of the black-bellied sheep, and the grunting of the pigs as they slurped their swill, the heavy scent of cow manure and straw. Feeding the animals foliage, stripped from harvested sweet potatoes, grass and other foodstuff was fun. The cows load their bass notes as they ground their teeth from side to side while eating, and the horses whinnied with excitement before gorging themselves on hay. I love the smell of the cow pen and even the pigsty, the cushion of warm hay on which the pigs slept, emitting a pungent farmyard aroma. I like watching my aunt milk Rose the cow and listen as the fine jet speared and frothed into the empty pail. Aunt Elise's expert hands joined down, then releasing the teats in a steady pulling rhythm. The pens, the potent smell of manure and hay, the call of the animals, were the cornerstones of a unique inner freedom. On reflection, I think every child should have an experience like that. I'll go on to another area, still with my aunt and uncle. We used to go into myself, my brother, and our cousins. We used to go into a nearby field, a massive field, where there are all sorts of fruit trees. So I wrote here, we picked cashew nuts and plums, nicked guavas, and sucked akis. Every variety of mango grew in these fields, green, orange, brilliant red, large and small. Despite my previous immersion in the natural environment, Spooners Hill, where they live, Spooners Hill, made a big impact on me. It was an experience that filled me with awe at the complexity and fecundity of nature. And it began pretty much from the doorstep of my uncle and aunt's property. Cosette's plantation, when the cane was ready for harvesting, was like an impenetrable forest of giant grass, some mature cane, as much as 3 to 5 meters in length. As such, it could be a place of threat and danger at night, while a site of adventure and discovery by day. But all this changed when the cane was cut. Men and women attacked the crop with cutlasses and packed it on trucks. When removed, they got wide sweeping views across the stripped fields. How different then the landscape with its distant vistas and exposed undulations. There's a popular cliche that Belgians run from rain and run to fire. I remember playing in open fields, ignorant of the threat from freshening breeze and gathering cloud, of an imminent downpour. Soon the lofty jingle of a million bell chime from drizzle in downward flight before the deluge. Then the race for cover, every man-jack for himself or herself. The rush to shelter at the onset of a tropical storm was deliciously scary. The biting wetness of drops striking the body now here, now there, in 2s and 3s. And in moments you were drenched from head to foot. Streams and rivulets appeared everywhere. The raindrops exploding like tiny bombs in the film of water that soon covered the land. Running speedily at such times was not unlike stroking a reclining torso and becoming better acquainted with its contours, curves, undulations, troughs, the extraordinary sensuality of the land, its rise and fall. Do I have more time or should I stop there?
Well, I think we
Paul.
could listen all evening, actually.
Yeah.
How can we stop this? We could just, I think we're all gripped.
Could I read a bit more? Or
Yeah, yeah, that would be wonderful.
okay, what I've gone into a section here called Sunday matinees, and I'm in Britain now. I could read about the experience of travel, but I mean, that's for another time. Please read a book yourself about that. Sunday matinees were interesting because, you know, we came here and we had a television set in front of us for the first time. I didn't know that television sets existed, but my parents had bought one. Yeah. Each Sunday afternoon, a feature film was screened. This brought several members of the family together to share the experience. A rare occasion when we sat together to enjoy something. Stars such as Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, Judy Garland, Errol Flynn, Alec Guinness, Lauren Bacall, Humphrey Bogart, Robert Mitchum, John Wayne were seen in a series of fine and not so fine movies. Through Astaire and Rogers, we were introduced to musicals, popular in Britain, but not so amongst many West Indians. And I use that term West Indians because it was pertinent to that period, who simply didn't take to the genre. Having said that, my mother resonated with the performances of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. Films with a coloured, in inverted commas, coloured presence were of particular interest, but were often hugely disappointing. The black actors cast in secondary or even third-rate roles as servants, menials, and half-wits. Lincoln Theodore Monroe Andrew Perry, better known by his stage name, Stepin Fetchit. Stepin Fetchit. The name says it all. I think took such parts as did Willie Bess, who often played a terrified simpleton, lacking the language skills, all-round intellect, and wider refinements required for adequate functioning in a white man's world. In other words, they personified the stereotype of Coon or Uncle Tom. Going back to what we were talking about the curriculum. Coon or Uncle Tom inherent to the Jim Crow culture of the American Deep South. I think of Griffith's 1915 Birth of a Nation, David Butler's 1935 Litless Rebel, starring Shirley Temple and Jack Kemp's 1948 Miracle in Harlem, with Stepin Fetchit. Apart from serving white folk, we saw black men, commonly referred to as boy, generally entertaining white folk as dancers and musicians, as if, along with cleaning and washing, that was their purpose in life. Black women such as Louise Beavers were almost always working in the kitchen, if not picking cotton in a field. We never saw people of color in positions of authority. The imbalance of such representation was not debated in depth in our family. We just didn't know how to go about discussing such things, though it was apparent in occasional comments and asides that we were universally disturbed by them. On seeing Casablanca for the first time and hearing the character Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart, speak that immortal line, "Play it again, Sam," I felt sick with anger. This instruction was given to the black pianist Arthur Dooley Wilson, who played the character. My second name is Samuel, Paul Samuel Dash, hence Paul S in my, email address. My second name is Samuel, and Sam would be its abbreviation if I use that name, which I never will. Having seen several films at that time in which black characters were bullied and demeaned by all manner of means. The name Sam certainly when applied to me as a result of Casablanca would forever be tainted. Such characters were black, just like us, yet in the way they were made to perform on the screen, we could have been watching characters from science fiction, but with a black skin. Shall I stop there?
Well, Paul, it feels like quite a moment to end on. I think we all do need to go and read the book, because we definitely would sit and keep you here all night. What a treat. What a treat. Thank you.
I'll say about my voice. I'm still, but they're not really working very well.
It was, well, I can say, what a treat. And we are silent audience because they don't have voice tonight. I know we're applauding. I invite our panelists, though, to unmute. And yeah, applause, please. Thank
you.
Can I say a couple of things as well? I know that we need to go.
No.
Yeah, wonderful. Eric Huntley, former CEO of Vogel Literature, has assisted me in putting this book together in terms of it's self-published, and he's assisted me in finding various people. And he's written a postscript that I think everyone should read, because I think his writing is so excellent. So he's put a postscript in here, which wasn't in the first edition. And also at the front, there's a new introduction by Marinda Matthews, who is at Goldsmiths, a wonderful friend and supporter of mine, and someone that I worked with when she was a student at Goldsmiths. She's now a lecturer at Goldsmiths. Marinda Matthews, she's got an introduction in here, as well as Chris Searle, who used to be a colleague many years ago at Goldsmiths, and they're worth reading. If you don't read my trash, read them.
Oh, Paul, I hope we're gonna get the design gremlins sorted out soon, so that we can all get our hands on this.
Yeah, it was infuriating. I've got 400 books here. It has to be pulped. I refuse to put them out there because such errors are made, but we're getting there. We really are, because the new PDF, I've seen it today, and it's looking fine.
Please let us know as soon as we can get hands on it, because the people will be eagerly awaiting. You've got a wide fan club, Paul, for your work, known far and wide. As an educator, an artist and an author, and lots of them were here tonight, including lots of people who were your former students as well. So you've been warmly received. I just want to thank you. I want to thank you on behalf of NSCAD. Thank you so much. That was an incredibly moving and powerful and evocative reading. Really got us there. And you know, what a hopeful concept that you bring us actually in the title of the book, to be in the morning before the day. That to me feels like a metaphor for the evening and the work that's going on.
Sorry.
Feels like a metaphor for the evening, to tonight, and the work that's been discussed that's going on. It does feel like we're in the morning, before much more to come. I want to thank everybody for what you've done this evening. Paul, thank you for such deft and generous chairing of the discussion of the panel. You really
wonderful people. I'm in awe of them. I really am.
Well, you gave such generous steer and really incisive questions, and it allowed the panel to really reflect and bring their considerable expertise.
Yes,
and experience and lived voice. So we thank you so much. I thank you all. Thank you, Paul, Marlene, Emily, Diane and Claire for this evening. Of course, the RA group for this work that goes on, and to the NSCAD members and people here tonight who are really sort of committed to doing the work that's required. It's been a milestone tonight, actually, I think, along the way. We're in the morning of the work for sure, but it's been a real inspiration. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for what you've done. Thank you very much.
Sure.